Well, welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. You know, there aren't very many things that really get me riled up, but I'm going to talk about one this week that does. I can't tell you how it really disturbs me to see the things that happened in Iowa this past primary cycle there with the caucuses. You remember a couple of weeks ago I mentioned that these are the sorts of things that go on all the time in Republican Party caucuses and primaries. The powers that be in the Republican Party want certain people and they do not want certain people, and they will do anything to ensure that their man or their men get through. This is also the case that happened in Iowa. There are a lot of things that went on there that were not ethical, were not moral. I'm not sure who won and who did not win, but that's not the point that I want to bring forward this week. What I want to point out is that anybody could attend these caucuses. They didn't have to show ID. They all wrote it out on a sheet of white paper, and there are instances where people put it on Post-it notes as part of their vote in the caucus. And we had a man there looking at it, and he said, well, in the caucus where he was, it was all fair. They turned in their slips, and they tallied up the votes, and so on and so forth. But the problem is, at that point, it is not transparent. It goes into a system through the computers, and you don't know exactly or whether or not your tally at your precinct was the same that's recorded in the master file of the results. And so unless you take a look at those final results and you kept a tally of the vote in your precinct, you don't know whether or not that is correct, the one that's being counted for the press and the whole system. It is a weakness in the system where there is not transparency from the voter clear on to the final tally. The thing is that I know of a precinct where someone who does not even live in Iowa gave a 2-minute speech on behalf of a certain candidate. Now, why was that allowed? I don't know the circumstances, but to me, that doesn't seem quite right. Another thing is they didn't take ID of anybody. How do we know that some of these workers that came in from the outside for particular candidates to give the ground game its impetus weren't at the precinct caucuses as well? I mean, after all, do you know everybody that lives in your precinct? They show up, they vote in your caucus, but do you really know who these people are? That they actually live in your precinct? Do you know all of your neighbors? You might next door, but what about blocks away or miles away within your precinct? So how do we know that this whole process was, as they say, copacetic? We don't. And there are a lot of things like that that go on, and they will continue to go on unless you, in the process of your primaries and your caucuses, really take a close look at how the procedures are put together and monitored from beginning to end. You know, even the Des Moines Register now is calling for an audit of the election that occurred this last week because of discrepancies that went on. For instance, the famous 6 coin flips for Hillary versus Sanders. You know, I'm saying if you can get 6 out of 6 coins to land up Hillary, she needs to go to Las Vegas because she's the luckiest person I've ever known. And so there are a lot of things like that that happened that really call into question the results in Iowa. And some of it looks a little bit dirty to me. But that is normal that I've seen over the last 50 years of my history in such processes as that. So keep an eye on it, watch it at your own precinct level, jot down the results, and then take a look later on the official record if that's the same that was recorded by yourself at the moment. We know that the last election cycle that many of these things were not the same that were recorded at the precinct level and then later put in the official record. They didn't jibe. And so watch it. What do you have today for us, Bill?
Well, thank you, Art. We have got plenty to cover this morning, so as they say in racing, let's buckle up. According to The Hill, Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, says, "We are all angry because of the outcome of the Democratic, or I should say the caucuses out of Des Moines." Key phrase in here that he said was, "We're angry that a debt crisis is on the horizon and we've done nothing to fix it because we have a progressive president." Well, the last time I checked the Constitution, that the House of Representatives actually has the power of the purse for Congress. So anything that gets paid comes out of the House, and they're in charge of it. So why is it that it's a progressive president's problem? It's not so much. It's the fact that we've got a Speaker of the House that either doesn't know what he's doing, or there's some sort of an agenda behind it that, it goes back to political theater. Remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago regarding that. The Daily Caller, House fails to override Obamacare repeal veto. It says, in a 242 to 186 vote, the House fell short of the two-thirds needed to pass a measure Tuesday overriding the president's veto of a bill designed to dismantle Obamacare and defund Planned Parenthood for a year. Again, this is all political theater. And why is that? Because if you can recall, about a month ago, they had a bill that come up through the what's called an omnibus bill, and that is obviously a bunch of spending bills that are put together into one, and they try to ram this through as a somewhat of a budget, so to speak. And what they do is instead of actually having a real budget, they cram this thing through in order to get the government to continue funding the various levels of programs of big government that they have. And instead of putting up a fight at that point, the House of Representatives just folded like a house of cards. It was almost like former Speaker Boehner was there in charge. But yet, this is supposedly Paul Ryan, who's supposed to be doing something a little bit different. Of course, obviously, his record shows that he's not. So, again, political theater, but yet key point of reference here is a quote that he said, "We will repeal Obamacare and we will replace Obamacare if we get a Republican president next year." So what difference does that have to make regarding Republican versus Democrat, repeal versus replace? Why should we replace Obamacare? It's again, shows an agenda out there. Something else that happened over the course of the week is that the TPP was signed. And according to the New American, opposition explodes across the political spectrum. So keep an eye on that. Go to jbs.org and take a look at what we have for Choose Freedom, Stop the Free Trade Agenda. We want to make sure that we get to Congress, tell Congress that they need to let the president know that absolutely not. We will not be sending TPP or not signing TPP and joining that. Let's see. White House warns Congress not to delay the Trans-Pacific trade deal. Again, get to Congress and let them know absolutely not. We don't want to be losing any more of our sovereignty regarding this deal. Something very sad that happened, actually that happened last week, was the body of Lavoy Fiddicum was laid to rest. And what's interesting is that when you take a look and see what the state of Utah is doing regarding taking back the federal lands from the government, there's actually they actually have a plan to do this. They started back in 2012, and now it's gone to court over this. And that's just part of a multifaceted plan that they have. Very interesting reading if you take a look at that. Just Google Governor of Utah plans to seize lands from the federal government. And lastly, we'll follow up with what Art was talking about a little bit with Bernie Sanders. We've got the New American magazine just came out with something called "Can Some Socialism Be a Good Thing?" Well, we know that Bernie Sanders is a democratic socialist. It says in here, as even most defenders of democratic socialism freely profess, the good of the collective supposedly trumps individual liberty. Private property and the economic system that grows out of it, free market capitalism, is routinely invoked as a consequence of man's evil, selfish tendencies. Well, that's rather interesting, because as I recall seeing a video with Friedman, He talks about how what other country is not based off of greed that actually allows the flourishment of the individual. You won't find another country out there that provides any kind of collectivism utopias, or utopian collectivism, so to speak. And something you may not know about Bernie Sanders, according to the Investor's Business Daily, is that the man, it says here, Bernie Sanders, the bum who wants your money, is $65,000 in credit card debt. So let that sink in a little bit. Until next week, we'll see you then.